Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephania Cox. Here are today's top stories. Vice President Pence is in Maryland today. He spoke at Conservative Political Action Conference, one of the largest political events in the U.S. The former and now disgraced mayor of Baltimore is headed to federal prison. Her 3-year sentence comes after she used fraudulent sales of her self-published children's books to fund her campaign and political career. The outbreak of the coronavirus is now affecting the automotive supply chain. General Motors, Nissan, and Honda are some of the automakers that have their plants shut down in the Asia-Pacific region. Car makers are using countermeasures to keep the disruption from becoming worse. The Dow closing nearly 1,200 points down today. This marks its worst one-day drop ever. And a new clinical study indicates the coronavirus is much deadlier than SARS, as confirmed cases keep rising around the world and the death toll keeps growing. Vice President Mike Pence at CPAC today. He said the U.S. will do everything possible to protect Americans from the coronavirus. The Conservative Political Action Conference is one of the largest political conferences in the U.S.
Over 10,000 will descend to Maryland this week for CPAC, the largest gathering of conservative thinkers in the world.
It's just a bunch of patriots that are getting together that love this country, that respect our country, the Constitution, and what made this country great.
Vice President Pence spoke at the event for the 14th time today. He commended President Trump for following through on his campaign promises.
Ronald Reagan said it was morning in America, and President Donald Trump made America great again.
The theme of this year's event is America versus Socialism. The organizers want to raise awareness about authoritarian socialist regimes.
Well, we provide a platform so that people smarter than I am, who can articulate these ideas better than I can help people understand what these regimes really are about.
Speakers are also connecting the theme with this year's presidential election. The Democratic frontrunner, Bernie Sanders, is a self-proclaimed Democratic socialist. He's running on a platform of socialized health care and education.
And so we're trying to show our generation that the Bernie Sanders-style socialism will result in Venezuela. It will never make us like capitalist Denmark.
President Trump, in contrast, is a staunch opponent of socialism. He said in the past that America will never be a socialist country. His Saturday keynote speech is the event's main attraction.
And at CPAC, we sat down with Representative Mark Walker, who gave his insights into the coronavirus as it's seen in Washington. He says getting people to understand what the outbreak could become is what matters most right now.
What preparations, what kind of scenarios are being talked about, I guess both in terms of the potential health crisis and also economic repercussions worldwide?
I think the first thing all across the Hill today, in fact even in our leadership team this morning, our conference this evening, we were making sure that people understand the serious nature of what this coronavirus could be. It's kind of like preparing for a hurricane, being a native Floridian. You don't know where it's going to land, but it's go ahead to get out in front of it and start the preparing. That could come from a funding standpoint, but also from the healthcare side as well.
So practically speaking, what kind of scenarios are being talked about?
Well, we don't want to forecast too much. We've got 15 Americans right now that are impacted. We did get reports late out of China today that some of this is subsiding, so to speak, but we take that with a grain of salt. Sometimes China doesn't always shoot straight with us. As really the ranking member on intelligence and counterterrorism, we are constantly pushing back on some of the cyber attacks and other things. So we're wanting to make sure this is legit. If it is, we celebrate with it. But we want to make sure, and the president deserves a little bit of credit, even going back as far as January 6th to even getting Americans, making sure they were taken care of, but even offering some of the support to the mainland that was denied at first. Yes.
And on the economic side, are there also preparations going on there?
There are. In fact, I was just back in North Carolina talking with a group that was connected with a hardware company that by April, if something doesn't happen, they're going to start hemorrhaging because of our dependence so much on China. Even the mask and some of the things that we would consider security items are made there. So we've got to really move quickly when it comes to our independence and making sure that we do not have a shortfall in these areas.
So is that looking for different supply chains or domestic manufacturing?
Supply chains is exactly, you fully understand this process. Yeah. I think we're even working on that moving now. Obviously the government has a certain role in it. We can't dictate or usurp our will on the private sector, but our job is to maybe create some space where some modifications could be made.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. My privilege.
Stocks are on track for their worst week since 2008 after the Dow made history, closing nearly 1,200 points down to mark its worst one-day drop ever. All three indices were down more than 4% when the closing bell rang today. For the Dow, the decline was particularly bad. It has lost 10% from its recent peak, putting the index into correction. The S&P 500 is also in correction. All three are on track for their worst week since 2008. Stock markets across the globe are in trouble as investors continue to sell off as the coronavirus spreads. And auto plant closures in China due to the coronavirus have disrupted the industry's global supply chain. General Motors sales in China now down 40%, and plants in South Korea have shut down because of a shortage of parts. The industry is taking a big hit financially as now they have to ship parts in by air. NTD's Kevin Hogan has the story.
The automotive industry has started to feel the impact of the coronavirus. Lockdowns in Wuhan and other plant closures have already started to affect car sales and production. China is one of the world's largest car parts suppliers, exporting nearly $35 billion in parts in 2018. And U.S. automakers are by far the most reliant on China, taking in about a third of the exports. A senior managing director at a global management consulting firm explains the extent of the impact the virus is having on the auto supply chain.
Yeah, the coronavirus in China is already having a global impact on the automobile industry. The automakers with plants in China, specifically in the Hubei province, have been down now on the extended Lunar New Year and are still not slated to be back up and running until around the 10th or 11th of March. Other car companies throughout China, Japan, South Korea are struggling with parts supply coming out of China. And the automakers in Europe and North America at this point in time have not been directly impacted to a great scale, although they are very closely monitoring the supply of parts that they're receiving.
Right, and since China is a major producer of car parts, it certainly seems that these factory shutdowns can really pose a problem. And now reports show that the coronavirus is spreading into other countries. How has that affected the supply chain?
So there are now obviously confirmed cases in South Korea, which has caused the supply chain there to be limited and automakers there to be limited in their production. We've now seen the spread of the virus into northern Italy, which is a manufacturing and industrial area, and we've seen it spread into Iran as well. So this has now become a global problem, and it's a little bit difficult at this point to predict how extensive this is going to be, but it is clearly a global problem at this point.
Clearly, we're facing an international crisis. Now, how long can these car manufacturers hold out without a steady supply chain?
Well, if we can't get people back to work and the supply chain infrastructure running again within a couple of weeks, we're going to start to see downtime in North and South America as well as in European automotive production.
The expert says the automotive supply chain has proven to be resilient, and he expects the industry to be able to recover. He does not expect car prices in the U.S. or Europe to rise. Kevin Hogan, NTD News, New York.
3 years in federal prison. That's what's in store for the disgraced former mayor of Baltimore after her sentencing today. She was convicted of arranging fraudulent sales of her self-published children's books to nonprofits in an effort to promote her political career and run for city highest office.
Disgraced former mayor of Baltimore, Catherine Pugh, was sentenced on Thursday to 3 years in federal prison. Federal authorities accused Pugh of double-selling the books. They said she kept many for self-promotion purposes and failed to deliver them to institutions they were purchased for, including the Baltimore City Public Schools. Pugh used the proceeds to fund her mayoral campaign and to buy a new house. She was also sentenced to serve 3 years of supervised release after completing her prison sentence, and was ordered to pay more than $4,100,000 in restitution. The scandal made a mockery of Pugh's inaugural promise in 2016 to restore trust in Baltimore's leaders. This as the city has struggled for years with poverty, police abuses, and political mismanagement.
Iran has the highest number of deaths from the coronavirus outside China, with official reports at least 26 so far. But the outbreak there could be even worse than reports suggest. Our France correspondent David Vives has the story.
Narges Khanalizadeh is among the first victims of the coronavirus in Iran. The nurse's death stirred up emotion on social networks. Although she tested positive for the coronavirus on February 26th, according to Iran's regime, she died from the flu. Khanalizadeh's case challenged the official narrative on the coronavirus. She's not the only one, as we can see people posting information on the coronavirus situation in Iran that depicts a reality much different from the information released by the regime. Iranian MP Ahmad Farahani declared to the press on February 24th that in the region of Qom, the virus killed at least 50 people. At that time, the Iranian regime said there were 12 deaths in the whole country. According to former diplomat and Middle East expert Nidar Nouri, the regime is covering up the coronavirus. The virus outbreak started 3 weeks ago in Iran. This has been confirmed by some MPs, but our source is the medical staff and nurses who share their information on social networks. According to Nouri, the regime covered up the outbreak while important events took place. February 11th marked the 40th anniversary of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, and MP elections were held on February 16th. But the outbreak came to a point that was no longer possible to conceal. Iran's Vice Minister of Health was infected with the virus, and more officials could be infected by now. According to our sources, several mullah and high-ranking officials are now infected by the coronavirus. China is the first business partner of the Tehran regime, and for Nouri, this might explain why the outbreak is affecting Iran so seriously. The regime is so dependent on China, despite warnings coming from the WHO and medical agencies throughout the country. As flights between China and Iran continue, Mahan Air, the first plane company, made at least 55 flights since the beginning of the outbreak. Meanwhile, the Iranian regime accuses Washington of triggering fear over the coronavirus. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that Iran may have concealed vital details about its outbreak. He also urged all nations to tell the truth about the coronavirus. David Vives, NTD News.
Up next, more on the virus. A new clinical study reveals the coronavirus is much deadlier than SARS. Find out more when we return.
This season, take an incredible journey through 5,000 years of culture with Shen Yun. Discover why people are calling Shen Yun a visual feast, a pleasure to the ear, an epic tale, a must-see. Shen Yun, an all-new production every year.
Viewers have described China Uncensored like The Daily Show, but about China.
At the beginning, I was super excited when I got 500 views, and now the show's grown to about 500,000 subscribers on YouTube. One episode reached 7.9 million people. I'm a little freaked out that that many people have seen my face. In 5 years, I see China Uncensored as the sole source of edutainment worldwide.
And now, more on the coronavirus. A new clinical study indicates that the coronavirus is much deadlier than SARS. Our reporter Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
So how deadly is the new coronavirus? In a new clinical study published in medical platform medRxiv, which publishes papers that have not yet been peer-reviewed, a team of doctors in China studied 214 coronavirus patients in 3 different hospitals. The study concluded that the novel coronavirus could infect the nervous system, the respiratory system, and skeletal muscle. This makes the novel coronavirus much more dangerous than SARS, which could only infect the respiratory system. In addition, the study found patients whose nervous systems were infected were more likely to die. And while the virus can be deadly, more than 80% of cases so far have only mild symptoms. That's according to a study published recently by the Chinese CDC. But mild symptoms could also make the epidemic harder to contain because they're less likely to seek medical help. And an exclusive internal documents obtained by NTD reveals China's epidemic prevention measures focus on maintaining stability but not saving lives. A security briefing from Hubei province on February 22nd detailed how around 3,300 so-called sensitive and harmful messages from online platforms were deleted. And then they pushed over 200,000 so-called positive messages about the situation amid the virus outbreak to sway public opinion. Over 600 so-called rumors were deleted and the writers were given a warning. The briefing also mentioned how several so-called hostile media were continuing to spread so-called lies about the origin of the coronavirus being engineered by humans. And outside China, Iran has the highest death rate. 2 high-level officials on Thursday were also confirmed with the coronavirus. One is the vice president, and the other is the chairman of the parliament's National Security and Foreign Affairs Committee. The same day, Saudi Arabia closed its borders amid fears of the coronavirus. This effectively halts foreigners making the pilgrimage to Islam's holy sites. The 2 holy sites, Mecca and Medina, usually see millions of Muslim visitors throughout the year. South Korea reported 505 new cases Thursday, marking its largest daily jump since the first patient was confirmed on January 20th, and taking the national tally to over 1,700. That's according to the Korean CDC. And in Italy, Lombardy's governor has put himself under self-quarantine after one of his employees came down with the coronavirus.
A Wuhan resident not infected with the coronavirus was forced into quarantine with those suspected of having the virus. In a living nightmare, she was also refused treatment for her ailments. NTD's Li Xin-an has the details.
Not infected with the coronavirus, but can't leave the hospital. A Wuhan resident is now facing a difficult situation.
The hospital won't let me leave, but they also won't arrange the coronavirus test. They just let me stay here. There are other patients in my room. All of them have both lungs infected.
Zhang started having a low fever in early January. CT scans showed no infection in her lungs, and doctors said she wasn't infected. Yet she was forced into quarantine because it's required by authorities for anyone who has a fever. But to receive treatment for her fever, she had to prove that she wasn't infected with the coronavirus. Local authorities sent her to a hospital. She lived in a room with 3 other suspected cases. Zhang got no treatment, only temperature checks. Yet the hospital wouldn't let her go, though it was unclear when the next test would be arranged.
The hospital doesn't care. They have too many patients and they're numb. They don't care about you.
We got in touch with Zhang again before publishing this video. She said she tested negative for the coronavirus for a 3rd time and was finally discharged from the hospital. But now she has to be quarantined for 14 days again because she stayed in the same room with patients who are suspected of having the virus. Reporting by Li Xin-an, NTD News.
Coming up, the luxury sector could lose billions according to a survey of industry executives. It reveals how reliant luxury brands are on the Chinese market.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled and political agendas have subverted media. the Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
Now to the luxury goods market. The coronavirus could cost it billions, according to a recent survey by industry executives. This comes as the new cases of the virus have surged outside of China. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell has the story.
Giorgio Armani showcased its collection to an empty room at Milan Fashion Week. The brand chose to stream its catwalk to a remote audience on Sunday over concerns about the coronavirus. Michael Kors was forced to cancel over similar fears. Reports say the virus was the main talking point on the ground. After Milan, Paris Fashion Week opened, though with lower attendance from Chinese buyers and cancellations from designers. The virus continues to cast its shadow. Compared to the realities of this health crisis, luxury fashion seems unimportant, but the impact on the industry is by no means small, as this data shows. Brands have become increasingly reliant on the Chinese market over the past 2 decades. Chinese taste for luxury has grown, with Chinese nationals accounting for around 35% of global luxury purchases. During the SARS outbreak in 2003, it was at just 2%. 28 top executives surveyed this week anticipate a $33 billion to $43 billion hit to luxury sales. Travel restrictions have held back sales both inside and outside of China.
25% of the world luxury market is Chinese tourists. 25%. It's huge.
Savoni, who runs a data intelligence firm for luxury brands, says Chinese consumers are turning to online purchases.
So you will engage much more digitally. Maybe you're going to engage more with virtual reality, trying the makeup on your phone and so on, because you're staying home for 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Perhaps we'll be seeing more streaming of shows like Armani's to remote viewers. Jane Werrell, NTD News.
And now to New York. A big outflow of residents has the state's population shrinking, many of whom are moving to Florida. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on what's behind the decline.
New York State's population is shrinking as the nation's numbers increase. A report from Empire Center for Public Policy says the population has barely increased since 2010, having lost 1.4 million people to other states. But first of all, what is the significance of a shrinking population?
If you've got a net loss of people to other states, I think it is a key indicator of whether the climate of the state, the economic climate of the state, and whether the affordability of the state and the quality of life in a given place is attractive and is retaining people.
His report shows that about 21% of people leaving New York moved to Florida from 2011 to 2018. McMahon said it makes sense. Unlike New York, Florida has relatively low taxes and people can save a great deal of money there, a retirement haven. He said domestic migration is the biggest reason behind the shrinking population, but there are other factors.
Now foreign immigration is declining, it's dropping. And the main result of that, in combination with a falling marriage and birth rate, which was a nationwide phenomenon, and that's also being felt in New York, is that New York's population total is now dropping.
Overall, he says the shrinking population is a warning that life in New York has to become more desirable so more people stay there. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
Coming up, Daredevil Nik Wallenda prepares the walk, the tightrope above an active volcano. Find out how he plans to make it to the other side after the break. Tightrope Daredevil Nik Wallenda is preparing to walk above an active volcano in Central America. Today, he spoke about how he plans to approach the challenge.
Tightrope walker Nik Wallenda is preparing to walk a thin wire above a volcano in Nicaragua. It will be the highest and longest walk he has ever attempted.
Over this volcano, I'll be dealing with the winds of the Grand Canyon potentially. I'll be dealing with the gases that are so thick that you can potentially not be able to see 10 feet in front of me, similar to Niagara Falls, which was the mist. The difference here is it's a deadly gas.
Wallenda has been training with an oxygen deprivation mask to mirror the conditions above the volcano. He'll make the walk wearing goggles, a mask, and possibly oxygen tanks. His shoes have been designed with thicker soles to reduce heat. Wallenda successfully walked across Niagara Falls and above Times Square. He said the idea to walk over an active volcano came to him on a plane.
In fact, about 6 years ago, me and my wife were flying into Mexico City, and as we flew in, we flew over an active volcano. And I looked down and said, I'm going to walk over an active volcano.
Wallenda is part of the Flying Wallendas. He's the 7th generation of his family of daredevils. His trek can be viewed on ABC when it takes place on March 4th.
Today is International Polar Bear Day. In celebration, a baby polar bear cub at Copenhagen Zoo took its first steps outside.
The polar bear cub, who has not been named yet, took the first tentative steps outside its feeding cave, encouraged by its mother, Noelle.
The cub and the mother has been in the birthing den for almost 3.5 months now. But so this is the first time they actually come out in the enclosure.
It was also the first time outside for 17-year-old Noelle since before giving birth on December 6th last year. And she took the opportunity to roll in the snow, walk around the enclosure, and take a dip in the pond. The cub will undergo a veterinarian check in the next few weeks when it will be determined whether it's a boy or a girl. Zoologist Mikkel Stelvik said the cub would likely stay at the zoo for up to 2 years before being moved to another zoo as part of the European breeding program. This is good news, as the world's polar bear population is on the decline. That's why every year, February 27th, conservationists work to keep them in the spotlight.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.